Turn that on. And yeah, we're about 1 minute ahead, but that's okay. Anybody want to throw out an initial question to get things started?
So all of the files that we have, the application that we're supposed to use, the JPHS win, that's what we're supposed to use to analyze the files.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And we are supposed to use not the JP hide or the JP seek, but just the JPHS win.
Yeah, it should look something like this.
Okay.
Yep. And then you basically are going to open the JPEG and you're going to seek. So basically, if I see if I can get to one of the images. That was dumb. There we go. I can pick any one of these images. Obviously, the original ones don't have anything hidden in them, but that would basically be the opening. And then what you would do is you would seek, and then you would enter in whatever password you think would recover the data from that particular file. And then if it was successful, it would give you success, and then you could save the JPEG file. One of the things is once you do get a positive extraction, make sure you use save as, so you don't overwrite the original. Otherwise, it'll overwrite the file that you are working with.
So save as, what would that be? It would be es.mp3-1- extracted then?
Yeah, actually, it's a little easier. You don't have to, I'm sorry, I misled you. The save JPEG as is when you're actually hiding something that you're going to save it. So when it'll come up and show you one that you've hidden something in, then it'll basically just tell you the file, and then you're going to save the file name out, and you can call it whatever you want. One of the techniques would be to save it out as some sort of, file.txt or something, so that you could look at the file, because JP hide and seek doesn't tell you what the file type was that you hid. So you can basically save it out as a text file, and then look at the text file, and that'll probably give you a hint as to what the recovered file was.
Okay, and we're pretty much at that point just doing compare and contrast with the original and the Stegode one to determine the passcodes for.
Yeah, so that's what when you go to do the seek, you're going to have to figure out what the passcode is for the one that you're working on. Obviously, the first step is to identify which files are new or which files have changed, so that you can apply the possible passphrase to one of the ones that were modified. No sense in applying the passphrase on a file that hasn't changed, right? So if you can determine which ones were changed or added, then you could apply the possible passcodes to those. Let me do something here real quick.
So pretty much looking at file sizes and then figuring out, okay.
Could be, or you could do something more sophisticated and look at the hashes of the files, that kind of stuff. Let me just do something really simple here. Let me go to, if I got to the right.
Right. And the files we're supposed to be looking at come from ES MP3, correct?
Correct. Let me just do something here for you. that may make things easier. I'm just going to create a test file. We'll put in this, and you can do this yourself. Secret message. So I just created a text file here. So if I bring JP hide and seek back up, no, wrong file. Hang on. There it is. Okay. So if I open, one of the JPEGs that are here, just to show you how this actually works. If I wanted to hide, and I'll just put in a password of test, T-E-S-T, T-E-S-T, and say, okay. And it's going to ask me what I want to hide. I'm going to select the test file. And then what I'm going to do is I'll save this JPEG as, we'll call it test.jpg. So now I've created a test JPEG here with that contains hidden content, right? It contains that information that was in the file. So now if I come back and I use JP hide and seek, typically I'll exit JP hide and seek because the application is not perfect. So I tend to run it separately. So now if I open the JPEG that is test, right? And now I do a seek, just to show you how this works. And like I said, you could have done this yourself. I'm going to put in the passphrase of test, right? And it's going to come back and say, oh, okay, what do you want to call the recovered file? And I'll call it recovered.txt and say save. And now it will have created recovered.txt, which is that original message. So that went through the whole process of hiding, using a passphrase, saving that out as another JPEG, and then doing the recovered process. So that's what you'll be doing, but obviously with the files that were extracted or carved out of the es.mp3. So just to kind of show you how JP hide and seek works, that's the process that you would go through, which is the second part, which is the seek part that you're going to be using. But I wanted to give you a example of how you would hide something in an image and then so you can recover it. So hopefully that kind of walks you through the entire process.
Okay. Let me know if this is out of line, but I noticed that one of the EO files is larger than its corresponding ES files. Is that supposed to happen?
Sure. There's no guarantee when you're hiding information in a JPEG. There's no guarantee that the one that you, the stegoed one, is going to be greater than or less than. And the reason is because JPEG files are lossy compressed, so that when something is hidden in a JPEG and then it is compressed, it could be using a different, quantization vector, and it could be either smaller or larger, but it will likely be different.
Okay.
If these were just to kind of give you an example, however, if you are using something like a true color image, like an RGB, BMP RGB file, and you're using a different stego program like STools, it only alters values within the true color image, and therefore the hidden file is exactly the same size as the original. It does not change, even if you hide a significant amount of information. And the reason is it's only altering the least
significant bits.
Right. So in this particular case, it's a JPEG, and because of the compression that takes place, it's a bit of a crapshoot. You could get a larger or a smaller.
All right, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions on this or anything else related to Python? I had let me just do this. I had a question that came up last week, and I answered it for the student, but it was really a good question that was kind of, I think, confusing. And let me do this. This is kind of out of band for this week's assignment, but it's useful. Let's say, for instance, I had I create a variable called message, and I put a value of 5 in the message. And I wanted to know if the user had, let's assume the user had entered that string, not, that I just hard coded it for simplicity here. And if I want to do something like if message equals 1 or 2 or 5, and I want to print out message if it was true, right? And when I do that, it comes back and says, oh yeah, it printed out the message, it was 5. However, what if I changed the message to 9? It still prints out 9. Why is that? In other words, it's not 1, 2, or 5, right? So why did it assume that was true? Anybody want to take a wild guess? Because this is really kind of a good question. It was kind of an interesting approach to basically validate the input from a user. This obviously is the incorrect way to do it, but anybody know why?
I know why.
Okay.
This was my question, actually. You have to do the MSG equals for each or. So for MSG equals 1 or MSG equals 2, and then so on.
Yep. And the reason for that is because when you just do or quote 2, that's true. Right. And I think what I had sent back to you, which would be, in my opinion, the preferred approach to do this, but the way you were doing it was right, except that you have to do the evaluation for each or, would be to say if message in, and then you could say the easy way to do that would be say in 1, comma, quote 2, comma, quote 5. Because Python allows us to basically determine if something exists in a list. So in this particular case, it's just a little bit easier to understand what's happening. And then you could say print message, right? Would be that. I'm not saying it's necessarily the preferred approach. That's a poor way to say it. It's just how I would have done it. So in this case, obviously it didn't work because the current value of message is 9. But if I said message equals 5, and then I rerun that, it comes back with 5 because 5 does exist in that list. So there's 2 different ways that you could do this. The OR method that you were using is fine, but to your point, you have to basically do the evaluation correctly. Otherwise, the reason is that if I say if, just to really simplify this, if I say if 2, right, print 2, it prints 2. The reason is that, and that may seem a little confusing, but it's because the evaluation of 2 is, does it exist? In other words, is it legitimate? But if I said if, quote, quote, print true, it doesn't print. And the reason is it's evaluating the string as empty. If string is empty, it comes back as false. If the string has anything in it, it comes back as true. So it's a method of Python because you can evaluate Booleans. We covered this, I think, maybe in week 1 or maybe it was in 3.12, but to basically all of the things that within Python data types evaluate to true or false. For example, if I said message list equals bracket bracket, I have an empty list, right? So then I can say if message list, I can say print true, and it doesn't print because it's empty. But if I said message quote 1 or a whatever, if I put anything in the list and then I rerun that, it'll come back as true because it's not empty. So it's just a characteristic of what Python will evaluate as true or false. So your original attempt which was this, is coming back true, because if any of the values within that are true, which 2 and 5 are true because it's a string that has some data in it, and that's why it was evaluating to true. So your answer was absolutely right. You have to basically do the explicit examination of each one of those. So it was a great question, because it's a little bit confusing of why does that syntax not work? And actually the syntax is working. It's just evaluating the 2 and the 5 both as true because they contain some information. In this case, the string is not empty. Does that make sense, or did I confuse everybody?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, cool.
Yes, that was great. That was even better than the first answer, because now I have a second option that's a little shorter.
Yeah, it's just it's just I don't want to say it's better. It's just in my view of how that is, it has two advantages. One is in my case, I think it's clearer because it's simpler. But the second reason is if I created a list, sorry, my phone is going off, message list equals bracket quote A, whoops. And I'm using that to evaluate something like, message equals quote A. And I could say if message in message list, right? Then I could say print true. And it prints true. The other potential value of this approach is if I want to change my list, we'll actually do it, let's do it the other way. If I want to add a value to the list, I can say message list dot append. I could type this morning. So now message list looks like this, right? So I can change the content of the list really easy to allow for another possible choice, right? And I don't have to create more ors. All I have to do is change the list, because typically when you do this, even more so, it would probably look something like this, where it would be something like valid choice, because this would this would be typically a pseudo constant. We do pseudo constants in Python. We use capitals to basically represent that. So when we're actually using that in our code, we know that we should not be changing valid choices, even though Python doesn't support constants. We can sort of fake it by saying, to make sure we remind ourselves that we're not supposed to change valid choices. So then valid choices would typically be a constant a pseudo constant near the top of your file that says, hey, these are the valid choices we're going to allow. And then if you want to extend the valid choices, you just come back and update your list in the script, right? And then it makes it really easy for people to know. The third value of doing it this way is let's go back to so that comes back as true because I have message in A. Let's say I had message equals quote F, right? And then if I run that statement again, it's not going to do anything. However, if I extended that statement slightly and I said else, print valid choices, then it would basically just print them for the user. You probably have some sort of message here, say, something like quote invalid input valid choices. are. Something like that. And that actually ran it again. So basically it comes back and now you have a way to use the list valid choices to post that to the user to say, hey, these are the valid choices without having to write a bunch of code. You can just use the list variable to basically provide that feedback to the user. So there's just a couple of advantages of using the list. It's a little cleaner, a little easier to read, but also you have the ability to create this constant, pseudo constant, that's going to hold the valid choices, and then you can use that constant in order to provide that feedback to the user if they enter in the wrong value. Again, sorry, long answer to a simple question, but it just kind of goes to the thought process of how you might want to actually set this up if you're going to really do it. And hopefully that benefits everybody, to kind of see the different ways that you could approach that, that really good question. Yeah, and Elizabeth mentioned the concept applies to zero as well. So if there's anything, if there's a variable, that has a value equals zero, that value, and if I evaluate, what that is, again, it will come back and tell me that that's false, so, from that perspective. So I can say if value true, else print false, and it prints false. Because again, zero, as Elizabeth pointed out in the chat, that zero evaluates to false. Where if I change value, set it equal to 1, or actually anything other than 0, it'll print true. Helpful?
Yeah, it is. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great question originally, Mason. That was really something that can really screw people up, because that initial syntax that that you had in your question looks like it ought to work, right? But it doesn't, because of what you had said originally. So cool. Any other questions this morning? Elizabeth, did you have anything that was that came to you that I didn't see?
No, I haven't got any questions yet. All I got was questions from last week's assignment for the NLTK assignment.
Okay. And did you see my message this morning regarding the difficulties Nicola's having with her VM? That I was hoping that you could follow up with her, because I think it's a VM issue, and I don't know if we just have to reset it or whatever, but we had a lot of trouble with the NLTK assignment with her VM, and I fixed it, but then it broke again. So I'm not sure what's going on. So you're the VM, the VLE VM expert. So I thought, you might want to follow up with her.
Yeah, I am working on sending her an email right now.
Okay,
and then I
thank
will
you.
CC you.
Yeah, let me know how that turns out, because I'd like to understand what is actually happening there. So if this happens in the future, we can I can talk to Jason or Fabian to find out what's causing this issue. So anyway, thank you for doing that, because I figured you were better at running down the VLE issues than I am.
Yeah, no worries.
Mason, did you have another question?
I do. All right. So I just waiting for a good time to jump in, but
No worries.
I'm wondering about this report. Would you like it to be a numbered list, or would you like it to be more of an essay format that explains what we did and what worked and what didn't work?
Yeah, either of those is fine. Basically, think of it this way. It's a good question. Think of it this way. If you were going to be performing this kind of investigation, right? How would you present that information to someone that to show them what you were able to discover? In other words, what process did you go through And what was your, how did you, what information did you use to solve the problem? And then what was the result? You know, typically folks will provide in that little report, you know, the actual content that they extracted, you know, that kind of stuff, and whether it was text or an image or whatever, and put that right in the report. But it just kind of giving you an opportunity to kind of think through how you would present the approach that you took in order to get the result. You know, think of it kind of as, you know, maybe you're doing an investigation of this and you wanted to recover the hidden content that was there, and what steps did you go through? In other words, first of all, like, how did you identify which files had changed or were added? You know, what did you extract from the output of the script that basically, you know, told you what application to use and what password to use and so on and so forth. And then what were the results? So just kind of a flow. I'm not super critical on the format of your output, but basically kind of tell a little bit of a story.
That sounds great. It's kind of like what we did in 480, where we just wrote a report about something. So I was kind of thinking of doing something like that. It was more of an essay format, and then we put the files. I won't say what they are because I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but I could just put the files in the essay, like you were saying.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, that would
Okay.
be perfect. That's what I've seen in the past students do. And like I said, it's just to kind of get everybody to kind of think through how do I present information like this to someone of interest. So think of it
Right.
as you're the investigator, and then, hey, this is what I did, and this is how I proved what this was, and so on. So yeah, it's just kind of give you an opportunity to practice that skill a little bit.
Sounds great.
Another question I have.
Yeah, go
The
ahead.
overview page that is generated with the program for this week, is that all of it or just the bits before the frame content?
Yeah, it's the stuff before, depending on the size of your screen. It's basically that first section that gives you the summary information. Everything you need is there, and then the script carves the images out, obviously, for you. But that get on my screen is a little bit bigger, so it basically all came on one screen. What you're looking for, it's basically all of the information that you need is in the summary content that comes up in that first page or two that pops up from the script.
Okay, so the rest of the stuff that looks like a PCAP file is stuff that you could sift through it, but
Nothing of value, right?
okay.
Yep.
That's it for me. Thank you very
Okay,
much,
no
Professor.
problem. Yeah, no, good question. It's like I said, people have had that question before, and it's like, just because my screen is so big, you're seeing the whole summary page on the first screen that I displayed the other day, but all of the information that you need to solve the problem is in that early page or two of text that comes up. The not to say that the other information the script generates, right, is not valuable, and you might be interested to see all of the different fields that are displayed, and the kind of information that is embedded in that ID3 header is certainly something to, you know, kind of examine a little bit, but it's not germane to the to what you need for the assignment. Okay, anything else before I close this week 13 section of the Python tutoring thing? We covered a lot today, so. All right, I will, just in case you want it, I will go ahead and post the recording. Have a good rest of your weekend, and hope to see you guys on Monday for the office hours if you have more questions or ideas that you want to share. So have a good rest of the weekend.
Actually, one more question before the recording stops.
Sure.
Office hours for next week. Is there going to be one on Saturday or no?
Sure. Not
Okay.
office hours. The Python tutoring session I will run on Saturday. The only obviously issue next week is Thursday and Friday. Everybody's off, but good for us. All of our stuff is on Monday and Wednesday and Saturday, so nothing should be impacted. What I will be doing is when I introduce the week 14 assignment for everybody, I will be extending the deadline slightly to, in respect for the holiday weekend.
Okay. All right, that's it.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Hey, no problem, guys. Have a good weekend and enjoy. And we'll thanks again, Elizabeth, for everything. And I'll stop this and post the recording and have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay.